Hello and welcome everyone to today's lesson, which is about articles. Let me share my screen so you can see the lesson. As you know, there are two types of articles: indefinite, that's a or an, and definite, article the. Mistakes with these articles are very common for speakers of all languages and can go both ways. One mistake can be dropping an article when it's needed, or the other type of mistake is using an article when it's not needed. Fortunately, these mistakes don't usually affect the clarity of your message, so you can relax about them. With enough revision, practice, and exposure to their correct usage, that's particularly important, exposure to correct usage, you will build the necessary reflexes to use them correctly yourself. So today's lesson is a bit of a revision, as you will have probably seen my other lessons on articles. So let's get started by looking at the basic rules of articles. Right? As you know, articles always come before nouns. Now, we have different types of nouns. So let's start by looking at singular countable nouns. We use a or an, and these are indefinite articles, before a singular countable noun when we mention it for the first time. We use a if the word starts with a consonant sound, and we use an if the word starts with a vowel sound. So, for example, I watched a documentary last night, but I spoke to an architect last week. A little note here, important note, be careful with words that start with the letter U. If U is pronounced as the way I said it, you, then use a, not an. So a university, a unanimous vote. And if it's pronounced as a, so as a vowel, then of course you will use an, right? So that's for singular countable nouns when we mention them for the first time. Now, if we mention this noun again, the article changes to the. It becomes the definite article. So our first sentence, I watched a documentary last night. The documentary was about electric cars. I spoke to an architect last week. I asked the architect for advice. All right. So now let's look at the rules for plural nouns. So if the noun is plural, an changes to a number or a quantifier. So I watched two documentaries, some documentaries, several, a number of, many documentaries, plural noun. And again, if we mention this plural noun again, the article changes to the. The documentaries were about electric cars. So the rules are simple. I think you have heard them and used them many times. So let's see where the common mistakes come from. Looking at common mistake number one is dropping a or an before a singular countable noun. And this usually happens when you don't have this type of article in your own language, or you're allowed to drop it. But in English, a singular countable noun never appears on its own. We can never have a sentence like, she is architect, or I was speaking to neighbor. You need an article before a singular countable noun. In this case, it's the first time we're mentioning architect or neighbor. It's the indefinite article. She is an architect. I was speaking to a neighbor. Of course, there are other words that can come before a singular countable noun instead of a or an. I just said they are never alone. It's a or an, or you can also use a possessive pronoun like my or your or his, or a singular determiner, this, that, another. You can say, I was speaking to my neighbor, or I was speaking to another neighbor. Right, so are there any cases where we can or must drop a or an? And I think you know the answer, yes, with or before uncountable nouns, because that's another type of noun in English that you are familiar with. words like water, information, advice. They look singular, but in fact they are uncountable nouns. So, for example, I asked the architect for advice. In this case, we cannot use a or an. But you can use a possessive pronoun, a suitable determiner, or a suitable quantifier before an uncountable noun. You can say, I asked the architect for his advice or for some advice. So this is common mistake 1, to do with the indefinite articles a or an. Now let's look at common mistake number 2, which relates to dropping the definite article, the. And the mistake here is dropping the when you are referring to a specific noun. For example, saying documentaries I watched. When you say documentaries I watched, we know which documentaries you're referring to. These are specific. You must use the definite article. The documentaries I watched were about electric cars. And again, of course, it doesn't have to be the, but we need something. It can be a possessive pronoun, it can be plural determiners, these, those, other, or it can be a quantifier because we can count some, a few, several. We can say, I watched those documentaries last week, or I watched other documentaries last week. So is there a case when we must drop the? And there is, definitely, and that's when we refer to objects or people in general, when we are not referring to a specific group of objects or people or person. So, for example, the documentaries I watched, we know which documentaries we're talking about, were about electric cars. Now we don't need the, because we're talking about all electric cars, not specific ones. Or in another sentence, architects don't earn more than accountants. We don't need the before architects and accountants, because we're talking about all architects, all accountants, not specific ones that we have already mentioned or we know we're talking about. It's the same, so these are plural nouns. It's the same with uncountable nouns. It's sometimes necessary to seek advice in general, not a specific advice. Okay, so now we come to common mistake 3. There are some special cases in English, some special structures, some special nouns that require the definite article, the. You just need to know them. I have listed here 7 of such cases. This list may not be exhaustive, but it's pretty complete. So you just need to remember these. Case number 1, when there is only one of something. So the UK government, not UK government, right? We need the in a case like this. The French president. Case 2, before collective nouns created from an adjective. The elderly, the privileged, right? Case number 3, before superlative adjectives. The highest, the most valuable. Before the structure, the specific structure in English, which is the more, the more. For example, the sooner, the better. Case number 5, before names of some countries, some geographical features, and some organizations, not all, but occasionally. For example, the Netherlands, the Red Sea, the United Nations, or even if you abbreviate the name, the UN. Case 6, before ordinal numbers, so the 3rd page, the 11th of June. And finally, before decades, the 1960s, the 60s. Okay? So are there cases when we must drop the? Naturally, yes. Again, these are specific cases to remember. 3 important ones: before names, people, companies, most countries. For example, President Kennedy, no the here. IBM, no the here. Brazil, no the. Second case, before cardinal numbers. not the page 3, but page 3, day 11. Also before sports subjects and meals, not the gymnastics, but gymnastics, geography, dinner. So I hope that's given you an overview, a revision of the cases where we must use these articles and when we mustn't. Again, as I said, it's all about revision, practice, and exposure to these articles being used correctly. So be patient. As I said, your message will still be clear if you make a few mistakes, and gradually they will become reflexive in your own usage. Before we end, I just want to talk a little bit about pronunciation. Starting with the pronunciation of a and an. As these words start with a vowel sound, they're usually phonetically linked to the word before them. And also, because they're grammatical words, the letter A in these words is pronounced as a very short sound called the schwa, which is a. Not on their own, so I can say a, an, but in a sentence, we don't say this is a controversial topic. We say this is a controversial topic. This is a. So it's connected to the Z and it's reduced to schwa. In the case of an, there is a phonetic link to the word after it as well. So we don't say this is an interesting topic. It all runs. This is an interesting topic. Because of this, a and an are difficult to hear clearly when you listen to English. You can only see them clearly when you read. That's why it's not easy to activate them to get a lot of good usage examples if you only listen. You need to see them. More or less the same thing with the. The is pronounced differently before a consonant and a vowel sound. Before a consonant sound is pronounced as the. Again, we have the little schwa sound. The show, the book. And before a vowel sound is pronounced as the actor, the end. So finally, it becomes even difficult to hear the difference between a and the. Why? Because both of them end in the schwa sound, a, the. And because a is always linked to the sound before it, it's really hard to hear the difference in spoken English. For example, can you really hear the difference between I watched the show and I watched the show? I read the two sentences and they sound almost identical. I watched the show, I watched the show. So I think you're beginning to see where I'm going with this. If you're using a lot of audio materials to work on your English, it's difficult to get exposure to correct usage. You can't hear, what was that an air, was it an an, they all sound very similar. So what you need to do if you want to activate these more quickly is to do occasional transcription exercises, or at least sometimes, not always, read the transcript to reinforce the correct use of these articles. And of course, writing your own texts and having your text corrected, getting feedback on your usage is also a very good tool to activate these little things. I hope this has been helpful as a revision and as some pointers on how to get these activated in your language. And I hope to see you in the next lesson. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. For more on this topic, click here. Remember to also check out my complete online course and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching and happy studies!